Okay, in this video we're going to look at styling the footer area of our Bootstrap web page. So in the previous video we used our own style sheet, and then we used some selectors, CSS selectors, and wrote our own rules to control the look and the appearance of the navigation menu. So we're going to do something similar here with the footer that we've got on the page here. Basically I want the footer to be the same color as the navigation bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the footer div and make sure that I'm picking up the row here. Now what I really need to do is add my own class to this row. So I'm just going to click on the little plus symbol here, and that allows me to add a class to the footer div row. So I'm just going to call that .footer. Now the reason I'm doing that is because I've got lots of divs called rows here. So this is called row, the one above it is called row, and if I was to apply a CSS rule to just row, then it will affect all of the rows that are used within my Bootstrap website. By giving this bottom row another class, a unique class, I can then just target that particular row and only change the properties for that particular row without affecting all the other rows on the page. So that's why I've given it another class, and I'm just giving it a name that makes sense and relates to what the actual element is. Again, I've clicked off, which means that it doesn't actually add that class in, so I need to do it again. So the key thing here is do not click off, press enter. Now when you press enter, it says where do you want to save this new CSS rule that you're about to create, and you've got options here. So the one that we want to choose is our layout CSS, which is our style sheet up here. We don't need to choose a media query, we'll talk about those later on. So we'll just leave that as it is and press enter again, and it will go and add that into our style sheet. Okay, now I can create a new rule, and it will be here for our container.row.footer. So it's picking up the correct element. I can just press enter on there, so it's picked up the correct element, and then we can come in here, take off the show set tick, and we want to go in and change the background color of that to be the 333, so it's the same color as the navigation bar at the top. And of course now we can't see the text, so what I need to do next is I need to come in and create another CSS rule. So this time we're going to come in and add another one, and at the end of that I need to add in H5, because I had some headings here which I'd assigned as a H5 tag, a HTML tag for H5. So this rule will only affect H5 elements that sit inside a row called footer. So it's only going to affect H5 elements in here. If we had H5 elements elsewhere on the page, they are untouched. So I'm just going to press enter to that, and then I'm going to come in and change the font color. So the font color that I'm going to go for here is going to be our CCC, and press enter, and you can see the elements that were H5s, which was basically all the headings that we had here, have changed. Now we've also got paragraphs sitting here, so there's other text here, but it's paragraph text. So I need to create another CSS rule, and this time I need to target the P tags that are sitting inside of my footer div. And again, it will only affect the paragraphs that are inside of here, not the paragraphs that are outside. So if I just press enter, come over and change the text again, so let's go for our CCC and press enter, you should now see that all of the paragraphs come in and apply. Let's just quickly preview this page in the browser, and let's save it, and then save the changes made to our style sheet as well. So as I scroll down, what you'll see is that our footer is the same color as the navigation bar at the top of the page, but the footer doesn't stretch to the edges, and that's because the footer is constrained by a container. So when rows are put inside of a container, they are restricted to a particular width of the page and are not allowed to stretch to the edges. We need to change that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into Dreamweaver, and I have to switch to code view to do this. I'm going to go to the code, and what I've got here, if I come down and look at my footer div here, at the moment that footer div is sitting inside the container div that we set up right at the start of this process when we were building our website. So if I go all the way to the top of the page and then look for the opening container div, which is this one here, so if I click on that and then scroll all the way down the bottom, you'll see that the closing div tag for that container div is right down here at the bottom of the page. Well, what I need to do is I need to take my footer div out of that container div, because that container div is restricting my content to a particular width on the page, and it's not a fixed size because it will change as the screen size changes, but it means it won't go all the way to the edges of the browser window. In this case I do want the footer, so I need to select the footer div, so that's all the content between these two tags. So I need to highlight that and I need to cut it, so Control or Command X, and then that needs to go outside of that container div. So clicking after the closing div tag for our container, I now need to paste in the footer. Okay, so let's have a quick little look at what's happening with this now. So if we scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can see that we've got our footer down the bottom here. It's lost some of its styling, and that's because on these rules here it said that it had to be inside the container and then a row, then footer. I've just taken it outside of the container, so what I need to do is I need to edit these rules and say it's no longer inside the container, so I need to just delete that. We've just got a row which is called footer, which sits outside the container, and I need to do that for all of these. So I'm just going to double click and remove the container section, because the footer is no longer sitting inside the container. It's still sitting in a row and it has the name footer. So let's just make sure that we get rid of these container bits, and then when I come down you should see that those styles reapply themselves now. So let's just preview this in the browser, because there's still an issue on the page that we need to resolve. So let's save that and save the style sheet, and as I scroll down you'll see that the footer now does stretch right to the edges of the page, but the text also goes to the edges of the page and is not being restricted to the boundaries that we have set for the rest of the content. So again, we need to go back into Dreamweaver and have a look at how we can fix this issue. So let's go to the code, and what we know here with our footer down the bottom, so if we just go and pick up our footer area, we know that our footer is now sitting outside of the container, and that's what we wanted, because we want the footer to stretch all the way across the browser window, which it now does. However, the content inside the footer we want to be restricted to the container. So what this means is that all we need to do is, after the row for the footer, we need to then add a container to restrict the elements that are inside the footer so that they don't stretch to the edge of the page. The footer will still stretch to the edge of the page, and otherwise the background color will, but we need to go here and add a div, and we need to add a class, and we need to put in there our equals and our speech marks, and we are now looking for container. So I just need to type in the first few letters and it should pick it up, and then if I press return and then add our speech marks and our closing angle bracket, I now need to just close that div off. So I need to come down to where my footer ends. So if I click that row div, we need to add another div tag just in here. So when I click the row div, its closing div is the last one. That means our footer will stretch all the way across the page, but the content within it is going to be restricted by a container. I know that seems a little bit confusing, but if you have a look at the code, it just makes sense that the container is sitting inside of the footer div. The footer div is no longer constrained by a container around the outside of that, which means it can stretch to the whole width of the page, but the content inside of the footer is being restrained using a container. I think the best thing to do is let's have a look at this in the browser window and see how that works out. So now when I scroll down to the bottom of the page, you should see that the footer is now allowed to stretch all the way across the page. The background color of it is, but the content is being restricted by container. So it's staying inside the same sort of restrictions that have been placed on these elements here. So that's how you can style your CSS footer in Bootstrap.